to fool you on April Fool's Day, this article is simply about historical figures who really did make fools of themselves on April 1st. All the stories are true, even if they don't have much to do with the spirit of April Fool's Day. Our first victim is Edward Schieffelin. You probably never heard of him, but everyone who knew him thought he was a fool. It was on April 1st, 1877, that Schieffelin set off on his own to go prospecting for silver in what is today southern Arizona. Not only did he fail to convince anyone else to go with him, but he also left the town of Tucson under much taunting and ridicule. The other miners joked that he would only find his own tombstone. This could have been a reference to the deadly desert he was headed for, but probably had more to do with the feared Apache Indians, who were winning a war against the U.S. at the time. Later that year, Schieffelin was not only still alive, but found one of the richest silver lodes ever discovered in the western half of the United States. Still bearing a grudge against the folks who ridiculed him, he named his discovery the Tombstone Lode. Schieffelin quickly made a fortune, sold his mine in 1880, and retired to a long life of luxury. Obviously, the fool here wasn't Schieffelin, so I fooled you. All the friends and miners who refused to go with him were the fools. Our next victim is the leadership of the Soviet Union. On April 1st, 1948, the Red Army began stopping U.S. and British military trains traveling through Russian-controlled sections of Berlin and demanded the right to search them. When the refusal came, the Soviets used their tanks and troops to blockade all roads and railroads leading into all of Berlin, including the British, U.S., and French-controlled sections. Thus began the dramatic Berlin Airlift, one of the proudest episodes of the Cold War for the Western democracies, and one of the most embarrassing for the communist cause. Over the next 5 months, U.S. and British planes made 2,326,000 flights into Berlin to deliver food, medicine, coal, and everything Berliners needed. Finally, the Soviets admitted defeat and withdrew their army. Those fools. Our next fool, General George Pickett, made a fool of himself on April 1st, 1865, during the U.S. Civil War. Pickett was a commander of 10,000 Confederate soldiers from the South. During the Battle of Five Forks, he had the most important job of defending the Five Forks, which was a massive road intersection needed for transporting supplies to the whole Confederate Army. It's weird that Pickett got the important job, since he graduated from the West Point Military Academy last in a class of 59 students. Although the North's Union Army was expected to attack on April 1st, Pickett decided to take a long lunch break. He had positioned his forces very poorly to begin with, but when the attack came, he wasn't around to organize and direct the fighting. Pickett's foolishness was a good thing, though. His men were quickly crushed. The Union captured the Five Forks, and the nearly 6 years of warfare ended 8 days later. Pickett was fired before the war ended, though, and later became an insurance salesman, while the Union general who defeated him during his lunch break, Ulysses S. Grant, was elected president.
Old teams, new names. Two big announcements relating to Major League Baseball, MLB, were made recently, and both had to do with the renaming of teams. In the first instance, it could be said that Montreal's loss was Washington's gain, as the Expos headed across the border to the U.S. Capitol and became the Nationals. That occurred in the last week of 2004. In the other development, the Angels managed to stay put, but their name has been stretched from the Anaheim Angels to the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. That change took place in the first week of 2005. As the current MLB season gets underway this week, consult the sports pages to see if the name changes have held firm. Anthony A. Williams was all smiles on December 29, 2004, when appearing at the press conference announcing the return of pro baseball to the city he presides over as mayor. His honor sported a jersey and a matching baseball cap bearing the red and the white of the Nationals' team colors. He had good reason to be happy. It marked the first time since 1971 that the District of Columbia had its own MLB team. For the 2005 season, the team will play its home games in RFK Stadium, the facility used by the Washington Redskins NFL team. The plan is to have a new 41,000-capacity stadium ready for the 2007 MLB season, if the team can sell $584 million worth of bonds to fund its construction. Assuming the city's fans aren't still mad that 34 years ago the Washington Senators left to become the Texas Rangers, investors expect that goal to be met. No construction of a new stadium will be needed for the Angels, but expecting fans and the rest of the league to accept the new name may require some effort. For starters, the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim is quite a mouthful. Moreover, it's absurd. With the name change, the Angels became the first team in American baseball, make that the first team in any national sport in the U.S. to have two cities in its name. Things made more sense in 1961 when the team first joined the ranks of MLB teams as the Los Angeles Angels. In those days, the ball club was owned by country and western star Gene Autry, the singing cowboy, and home field was in L.A. 5 years later, the team was sold and it relocated to Anaheim just a few miles away. For the next 31 years, the team was known as the California Angels. 1997 was when Walt Disney Company, one of the biggest contributors to the local economy thanks to Disneyland's location within city limits, purchased the team. That same year, the owners of the Magic Kingdom renamed their new acquisition the Anaheim Angels. Some fans claim the name change even helped bring the sports franchise some newfound luck. Within 5 years, it had won its very first World Series. Art Moreno, who bought the team in 2003, never expected that the recent name switch would generate so much attention, much less controversy. The way he sees things, the renaming of the Angels will give it broader appeal to a greater number of Californians. He views it as a way to widen its marketplace, and in doing so attract more advertising sponsors while generating more broadcast revenue. Disgruntled fans, however, are none too pleased about the latest change to the team's name. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, they reason. For now, the majority are satisfied to remain dedicated and loyal fans. But ever since some of them have begun likening Moreno to the devil, they say that his owning of the Angels is a conflict of interest.
Terminal Transit. The next time you queue up to ride Taipei's mass rapid transit system, don't be surprised if you hear music coming out of intermittently spaced speakers above the platform. One MRT stop that's been serenading waiting passengers with soothing sounds is the Cheongshao Dunhua station. There may be other stations on the various lines that are doing the same, but these ears have only noticed music at one location to date. The initial impression was that the music was a bit repetitive, but because it consisted of a series of simple piano chords, it didn't grate on the nerves. And if the intention was to lessen some of the stress, that's part and parcel of life in a big city, then mission accomplished would have to be the verdict. If passengers find themselves entertained, that's an added benefit. But transportation authorities in Taipei have had other reasons for filling the air with music at MRT stations. As it turns out, it's a preemptive measure designed to dissuade individuals who aren't intending to actually board the next train. Despite standing on the platform and appearing to wait for a ride, some have a completely different agenda for being there. In a disturbing trend, a growing number of distraught souls have resorted to jumping onto the tracks in a final act of desperation. In short, the number of suicides or attempted suicides at MRT stations has grown in recent months. How other metropolises have dealt with suicide attempts on their rapid transit lines has provided some useful insight for local MRT officials. To be sure, Taipei is hardly the only city in the world whose subway lines have a macabre magnetic effect on the hopeless. But some of the most pertinent methods of dealing with the phenomenon have come from other cities here in Asia. The above-mentioned practice of piping in soothing music via speakers suspended above the waiting queues was inspired by Seoul's success with the measure. And another method under consideration was first put to the test in Japan, a country whose spiraling suicide rates have required creative and drastic solutions. Tokyo has found that by putting mirrors in subway stations, those who might be contemplating taking their own lives tend to think twice. Something about suddenly being confronted with one's own personal image in that most impersonal of environments achieves positive results. In an article that appeared in the China Post recently, Taipei Rapid Transit Systems, TRTS, officials revealed what it sees as a long-term solution. Without going into specifics, a TRTS spokesman referred to safety devices, with 2006 as the completion date for their installation. Meting out punishment for those who make suicide attempts on train and subway platforms is common practice. In China, for instance, a jumper was sentenced to a 15-day prison sentence and a heavy monetary fine after being rescued from the tracks unhurt. Singapore sentenced a man to 6 months in jail in addition to a heavy fine when he leapt into the path of an oncoming train last year. He was held responsible for causing injury to 3 commuters who were severely injured when the emergency brakes were applied, causing them to lose balance and fall. Some Taipei residents who ride the MRT regularly have expressed doubts that the TRTS is capable of preventing determined jumpers. They cited the inability of workers to prevent injuries when merrymakers, Hare, got caught in escalators last New Year's Eve. More uniformed employees in stations is the only way to stem future accidents and suicide attempts, they suggested.
Not so hot in Hollywood. Spring is here and summer's just around the corner. But before the outside temperatures turn really hot, let's take a look at a rather cold topic. A couple months back, when winter was still in full swing, a magazine that goes by the name of Film Threat published its annual Frigid 50. Even the characteristically sunny weather in LA, where the publication's office is located, couldn't make staffers feel very warm-hearted. Well, not when they were duty-bound to come up with their yearly Coldest People in Hollywood list, at any rate. This year, as in past years, the zine gave the cold shoulder to celebs whose time to bask in the sunlight's glow had come and gone. Put another way, the names that we'll be looking at in today's lesson are what Film Threat calls showbiz's least intriguing people. Fahrenheit 9/11 may have heated up the box office last summer in the U.S., but hot was not how Film Threat viewed its director. For someone who's so good at polarizing, it's rather appropriate that Michael Moore earned the top spot on the Frigid 50. Indeed, frosty is the best way to describe relations between the two camps on either side of the divide that the film created. Right after the movie's release, Democrats were quick to rally behind the filmmaker and the exceptionally unflattering picture that it painted of Bush. Republicans were just as quick to defend the American president, calling the documentary distorted political propaganda. The huge financial success of the film kept Moore in the news all the way through the U.S. presidential elections, and up until the moment that Bush emerged the victor. Moore milked the photo ops and the media attention for all they were worth. The way that Film Threat interpreted things, Moore was working less to unseat Bush and more to raise his own profile. In choosing the ubiquitous documentarian as its choice for #1 frigid personality, the magazine had some insight to offer. Message to Michael: remember, it's not always about you. Lose the chip on your shoulder. the editors said. Clearly, Moore fit the magazine's definition of least intriguing individual to a T, as in ticks. In his case, the checklist was filled with them. The three main qualifications for joining the Ice Pack were A. An overbearing personality, B. Poor career moves, and C. Chronic inability to stop making fools of themselves. Moore's primary foible was his supersized ego. Less would suit Moore in the estimation of the Monthly. A further indication that Moore's popularity in Hollywood was on the wane could be seen in the Oscar race in February, where Fahrenheit 9/11 received 0 nominations. That might explain why a slimmer and more nattily-dressed version of the stocky, slovenly director was on display at about the same time. At the rate he's going, he may even avoid the top spot in next year's edition of the Frigid 50. Then again, he's still talking about doing a Fahrenheit 9/11 sequel, so maybe not. Close behind Moore at number 2 was actress Halle Berry. Film Threat couldn't help but ask why she chose to play in Catwoman after Monsters Ball. In just 3 short years, she'd gone from being an Oscar-caliber talent to a Razzie Award-earning actress. In the number 3 spot was Michael Eisner, CEO at Disney. He was cited for sparking dissent among Disney shareholders, destroying a profitable partnership with Pixar, and greenlighting flops like Home on the Range and The Alamo. At number 4 was M. Night Shyamalan for the underwhelming thriller The Village. And rounding out the top 5 were Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson for their string of mass-produced mediocrity.
Art or artifice? Did French artist Marcel Duchamp knock down the barriers between aestheticism and functionality or reinforce them? The event which triggered that debate occurred when Duchamp took a workaday object exhibited in a New York gallery and called it art. There was no question about the object's functionality. The hundreds of men who saw it on display had no argument with that. But whether it qualified as art was the object of much debate, and one that still divides opinion to this day. Entitled Fountain, the piece confounded visitors who saw nothing more than an inverted lavatory fixture. As it turned out, their eyes had not deceived them. The object on display was exactly that, a porcelain urinal that was exhibited upside down. Looking back, it's easy to see why it shocked the art world and the general public alike. The year was 1917, and Duchamp's ready-made art was simply ahead of its time. Numerous indignant visitors threatened to turn the piece upright and relieve themselves right then and there, though none made good on their threats. The controversial piece didn't fare any better when being analyzed by uncharacteristically close-minded art critics. Numerous critiques expressed the opinion that Duchamp's fountain would serve more purpose in the men's room at the end of the hall. Looking back, it's clear that the tide of opinion in the world of art, at any rate, has turned in the intervening years. As it turns out, Fountain has found enough admirers among present-day art experts, in the UK at least, that it's been named most influential artwork of the 20th century. In a poll taken late last year, over 500 movers and shakers in the British art world selected Fountain as their choice. For taking a urinal and declaring it art, Duchamp gave the art world its first ever look at conceptualism. Simon Wilson, a British art authority, hired by pollsters to explain Fountain to the public at large, began by calling it a shock. How else could one explain the selection of Duchamp's piece ahead of any of those by Picasso or Matisse as the most influential work of the 20th century art? But Wilson continued by saying, it reflects the dynamic nature of art today, and the idea that the creative process that goes into art is the most important thing. More than anything, Wilson said in closing, Fountain showed that a work of art can be made of anything and can take any form. Ironically, skeptics could be in complete agreement with Wilson's final observation while being opposed to Fountain's selection. For instance, the opinion expressed by the Daily Telegraph, a consistently outspoken opponent of modern art, came as no surprise. In this strange world where babies are made in test tubes and people pay to drink water in restaurants, the result is not all that astonishing. It said disparagingly, the paper was a bit more agreeable in its assessment of the second, third, fourth, and fifth place finishers. The British media as a whole, along with the general public, had less difficulty seeing why those pieces were ranked accordingly. In second place came Pablo Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avion, which uses a collision of flat but colorful images to depict 5 prostitutes in a brothel. The work, painted in 1907, is considered by many to be the departure point from which art took off. Coming in at third was Andy Warhol's bright silk screens from 1962, depicting Marilyn Monroe's face in alternating colors. Picasso's Guernica and Matisse's The Red Studio found themselves at 4th and 5th place, respectively.
A big, hairy deal. New York, London, and Tokyo have all hosted it. Paris, Chicago, and Montreal have all hosted it too. Now it's Tokyo's turn to host it again. Beginning last month, the latest World's Fair started a 6-month run in Tokyo, 170 miles west of the Japanese capital in Aichi, to be exact. It'll be September 25th before organizers, exhibitors, and visitors pack up and head home. Roughly 5 months remain till closing day. Reasons for going include its proximity to Taiwan and the fact that big things are always expected of World's Fairs. For one thing, the centerpiece is absolutely mammoth, and that's in the most literal sense of the term. After all, it consists of 2 tusks, a trunk, and lots of fur. Or is it wool? As for the rest of it, well, it still lies buried beneath ice somewhere above the Arctic Circle. In case it's still not apparent, we're speaking about a woolly mammoth, or at least the front quarter of the creature. Now, if you're like most folks, you may be saying that, okay, a woolly mammoth is big as far as animals go. It's not exactly up there with dinosaurs or whales, but among land animals, it definitely outclasses most. But when told that the extinct species is the highlight of the World's Fair now underway in Japan, do you get a gnawing sense of disappointment? It certainly bears asking why the creature, just 1/4 of it actually, is the main attraction at an event that's supposed to highlight eye-popping, jaw-dropping technological advances. Are we mistaken when we expect to see some new use of glass or metal alloys? Or what about satellites or breakthrough computer technology? Are we wrong to have expected something along those lines? For the answer to these questions, we'll have to see what Japanese scientist Naoki Suzuki, who oversees the exhibit, had to say. At a media question and answer session a few months back, the researcher explained why the mammoth display is just as momentous as anything that has ever come out of other World's Fairs. The reason for this is readily apparent for anyone who actually takes a trip to the Aichi Expo, as the 2000 World's Fair is most commonly referred to. Incidentally, it's located less than 1 hour north of Nagoya by rail, the 3rd largest metropolis in the country after Tokyo and Osaka. What's more, Nagoya has a brand spanking new airport to handle the tourist influx, as an article in the February issue of this magazine pointed out. Getting back to the primary focus of this lesson, scientists have been subjecting the mammoth to a battery of tests. When they're finished running all their experiments, they hope to have gained a better understanding as to why its kind went extinct 10 millennia ago. The significance for Expo visitors is that many of those tests are being done in a lab that allows for public viewing. Large plate glass windows offer spectators glimpses of Suzuki and Company doing a 3D mapping of the behemoth's brain. Other analyses include studying rock and pollen samples extracted from its fur and cutting into its bowels for a look at what made it tick. The 5-ton creature was partially excavated from the frozen Siberian tundra in 2004 and shipped in climate-controlled containers. Japanese scientists hope to gain new insight into the forces behind mass extinction and how they may impact us. What excites researchers and many expo attendees the most, however, are plans to clone the mammoth if enough viable DNA still exists.
The Stolen Stradivarius. After performing with Philadelphia Orchestra as an associate cellist for 12 years, Peter Strumpf accepted a promotion and moved to L.A., where he became principal cellist of the city's Philharmonic Association. As an added bonus to moving up in the world, his new job gave him the pleasure of playing General Kidd, a 320-year-old cello made by the legendary craftsman Antonio Stradivari, 1644 to 1737. Rather than helping to increase Strumpf's name in the classical music world, however, the superior instrument brought him notoriety when it was stolen. Out of absent-mindedness, Strumpf accidentally left the $3.5 million Stradivarius cello outside his home. A traffic surveillance camera showed what had to be history's easiest multi-million-dollar theft. A passing bicyclist noticed it and simply walked over, picked it up, and pedaled away with it. The video didn't capture the thief's face, and the LA police had no clues. While on her way to visit a patient a few weeks later, 29-year-old nurse Melanie Stevens saw a handsome silver-coated case lying on a heap of garbage. Curious, she walked over, opened it up, and was delighted to find an intact cello inside. Thinking it beautiful, she decided to take it home. After a few days, she asked her boyfriend, who is a cabinet maker, to convert the instrument into a unique CD holder for her music collection. Only by a stroke of luck did the Stradivarius escape such a fate, which, in the words of classical instrument expert Robert Cora, would have been so abominable, I get sick when I hear it. Stevens happened to see a newspaper report about the missing Stradivarius before her boyfriend had a chance to get to work on it and turned it in. Despite the story's happy ending, the idea of the 1684 cello being turned into a tacky CD holder or crushed in a trash compactor still makes people cringe. Can you imagine it going on a garbage truck, said Daniel Rothmuller, who played the instrument for 25 years? Who was Stradivari? Antonio Stradivari was born in Cremona, Italy, in 1644 and served as a pupil in the workshop of the famous violin maker Amati. In 1680, he set up shop for himself, and his fame quickly grew. The craftsman made original alterations to Amati's violins and improved the design of the arching and scroll, and changed the degrees of thickness in the wood and the coloration of the varnish as well. His instruments are recognized by the Latin inscription, Antonius Stradivarius, Cremonensis facibat anno, date, meaning Antonio Stradivari, Cremona, made in the year date. Those made 1730 are thought to have been made by his sons. Despite having an arsenal of precision tools and computer models, present-day violin makers are still confounded in their attempts to match Antonio Stradivari's violins, although only an experienced ear can hear the difference in quality. Other than violins, Stradivari also made harps, guitars, violas, and cellos. Working up until his death in 1737, the craftsman made more than 1,100 instruments in all, with approximately 650 surviving until today. Of the surviving instruments, about 50 are completely undamaged. These most prized instruments are mainly owned by wealthy collectors, who lend them out to master musicians so that audiences can hear them. The King of Spain owns the largest personal collection of Stradivarius instruments.
Back where it belongs. Even before the Airbus A380 began its recent trial flights, it was already grabbing headlines as the biggest commercial jetliner ever conceived. At least 2 other jet aircraft are even bigger, and they've been flying for decades already, but they've rarely received so much attention from the media. Then again, since the C-5 Galaxy and the Antonov 124 are both military planes, it's only natural that a shroud of secrecy would envelop most of their missions. One exception has been the recent flights made by a certain Antonov 124. The media have widely reported flights it's made between Italy and Ethiopia. Considering the priceless cargo the Russian-built plane has been carrying, there's good reason for that. Inside were pieces of a stone monument 2.5 millennia old. In the eyes of many observers, the flights have served to right a 68-year-old wrong. The object of which we speak is the Axum obelisk. The 150-ton granite column had stood in Rome since being hauled out of Africa in 1937. In those days, Mussolini was in power, and Ethiopia was unable to protect itself against the military adventurism of Italian forces. One of the spoils of war was the 24-meter-tall monument that, for 2,500 years, had towered above land formerly ruled by the ancient Aksumite kingdom. The invaders dug it up, cut it into 3 less cumbersome slabs, and whisked it off to be admired by the fascist leader. Once in Italy, the obelisk was reassembled in front of the Ministry for Italian Africa building in the capital city. In the post-World War II era, the building has functioned as the headquarters of the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. Designating the edifice with a new name did nothing to placate Ethiopia, however, since the empty spot in Axum where it once stood still smacked of imperialism. Now, thanks to a repatriation agreement inked in 1997, the stone monolith will soon be back in its rightful place. Getting it from Rome to Axum has been no mean feat, however. Ethiopia remains one of the most impoverished nations in the world and one that lacks basic infrastructure. That means that roads where none had previously existed were purpose-built in Ethiopia, just to ensure the cultural treasure had a smooth return. The same was true of bridges. One major geographical obstacle has given the present-day Ethiopian government headaches unknown to the erstwhile Italian rulers. Ethiopia today is a much smaller country than in 1937 due to having lost in a decades-long struggle against secessionists. Ultimately, the Ethiopian side lost and the country of Eritrea was established. Particularly bad for Ethiopia was the entire loss of its coastline. As far as this relates to the Axum obelisk and its transport, it has meant that flying at home is the only option available to the landlocked nation. That explains why no small part of the 2005 Ethiopian national budget has gone towards laying down a custom-built runway. The aforementioned Antonov 124 is so massive that an extra-long airstrip for landing and taking off had to be constructed. Ethiopia is home to several obelisks, but the one taken by the Italians is considered to be the finest specimen of all. The general consensus among archaeologists is that it was a funerary object. The 2 false doors on its sides and the small ornamental windows that decorate the shaft played vital roles in helping the deceased ruler it honored ascend to heaven. Its return is a matter of great national pride for most Ethiopians, so much so that the day when the last piece touches down on Ethiopian soil will be a day off for the entire country.
Monster lobsters. Considering that Taiwan is surrounded on all sides by the ocean, it's always surprising to foreigners when a local indicates a dislike for lobster, crab, and the like. That revelation sometimes comes in a classroom setting, when the discussion between the English teacher and the students turns to seafood. More often than not, there's a very practical reason for the aversion, and it's usually got something to do with allergies. Shellfish, including lobsters, are particularly at fault when it comes to allergic reactions involving seafood. For the average lobster lover, that sounds like a tragic affliction, but sufferers point out that allergies choose us and not vice versa. As it turns out, there's some news coming out of the U.S. indicating that an increasing number of Americans are expressing a dislike of lobsters these days. However, in most cases, it's got little or nothing to do with itchiness, that telltale sign that one's broken out in a rash. Rather, more and more Americans, especially ones concentrated on the East Coast, are swearing off lobsters because of their appearance. When the shellfish being discussed emerge from a pot of boiling water, they smell like lobsters and taste like lobsters. The problem is that they just don't look like lobsters. More and more lobsters coming out of one part of New England look like monsters from the deep, not a mouth-watering meal. It's what's on the inside that counts, the old saying goes. But try telling that to diners who end up with the unattractive lobsters from Buzzards Bay on their plate. The sea creatures taste every bit as delicious as their more outwardly presentable cousins caught off Cape Cod, but at $12 a pop, they're a hard sell. That's because the crustaceans that are being trapped in Buzzards Bay, Massachusetts, look downright repulsive. Restaurateurs at area dining establishments know how tough it is convincing customers that the disease only affects the shell. Most worrying to the industry is that there appears to be no end in sight. There's no cure, and even if there were, how could inoculation of lobsters be carried out? The mysterious disease first began affecting lobsters in Massachusetts waters approximately 6 years back. The malady leaves the lobsters with blackened and corroded shells. Marine biologists say that bacteria that fed on the shells are to blame. The good news, as far as the lobsters themselves are concerned, is that the disease is not fatal. The sufferers survive, though in a somewhat weakened state. That should also translate into good news for diners, since the ugliness is only shell deep, and the meat inside remains as succulent and sweet as ever. But it's only been the rare diner who's brave enough to sample the lobsters. Most just can't get past the visual turnoff of the shell. One restaurant that goes by the name of the Blue Lobster, 10 miles up the coast from Buzzards Bay, may have come up with the answer. It's put nude lobster on the menu, meaning that the creatures arrive on the table sans their unsightly shells. Diners spear the chunks of lobster meat and dunk them in a heated blend made of butter and herbs. To date, the dish has been a great success. So much so, the other area eateries are following suit with similar offerings. Davy's Dive, a restaurant pub just down the road from the Blue Lobster, prides itself on its truthful advertising. The sign outside reads, "Ugly Lobsters," in big bold letters. Maybe it's the alcohol that emboldens patrons, but so far it's proved itself a popular and tasty menu selection.
Dolphins to the rescue. Dolphins have been seen swimming in tight circles during close encounters with predators such as sharks. It's a defensive posture to protect themselves and their young. In some instances, dolphins have even been observed attacking would-be attackers. The characteristically gentle marine creatures have even rammed sharks to show that they mean business. In an apparent first-ever case, however, 4 swimmers in New Zealand found themselves encircled by dolphins while a great white shark swam nearby. It was late last year when the incident in question occurred in waters off Ocean Beach on New Zealand's North Island. Lifeguard Rob Hose was demonstrating life-saving techniques to his teenage daughter, Nissy, and her 2 friends some 300 meters from shore. At first, they were thrilled to discover that they were swimming in the middle of a pod of dolphins. The sense of excitement turned to bemusement, however, as the dolphins began herding them closer together. Though it wasn't at all menacing, the behavior of the dolphins seemed highly unusual to the 40-something father. Even as a seasoned swimmer with innumerable hours of lifeguard duty under his belt, he'd never witnessed a phenomenon of this sort before. His instincts told him that something extraordinary was going on, but the awareness that he was in danger didn't immediately sink in. At first, he attempted to swim under and then away from the ring that the dolphins had created around their group. But no sooner had he broken free than two of the largest dolphins began nudging him back into their midst. Then Howes spotted it. The dorsal fin slicing through the water was proof positive that he and his swimming companions were in imminent danger. "I just recoiled," he told the New Zealand Press Association. "It was only about 2 meters away from me. The water was crystal clear, and it was as clear as the nose on my face," he said in reference to the shark. Howes estimates that the great white reached 3 meters from tip to tip. The species gets bigger, but specimens of far lesser dimension have claimed human victims. Matthew Fleet, another lifeguard, was in waters nearby when he witnessed the dolphins heading off the interloper. Initially, he had dived out of his boat to join them for a swim, but thought better of the idea after spotting the great white's dorsal fin, which was more pronounced than those of the dolphins. The sighting made him keen to get out of the water, and he managed to make it back to his craft without incident. Even after the great white had swum away, the dolphins apparently felt their human charges weren't entirely in the clear, and they continued forming a chain around them. Howes figures that the cetaceans offered his group a wall of protection for about 3/4 of an hour in all. In local media reporting, marine scientist Rochelle Constantine at the University of Auckland observed that dolphins were typically vigilant when in the presence of sharks. She saw nothing out of the ordinary in the dolphins' altruistic display toward Howes and his fellow swimmers. "They like to help the helpless," she commented. Howes, who's long regarded the opportunity to swim among the dolphins off Ocean Beach as one of the best perks of his job, concurs with that notion. As someone who's used to coming to the aid of swimmers in distress, he's particularly happy that Mother Nature has lifeguards on duty too.
Comic Contest. Only die-hard comic book fans might comprehend the whys behind the 24-hour comic phenomenon. For today's article, it's the whats that we'll concern ourselves with. For starters, let's define what a 24-hour comic is. For that, we need to take a look at Scott McCloud, the comic artist who invented the concept. Hoping to push the envelope and set a record at the same time, McCloud challenged fellow comic artist Steve Bissette to a competition. The dare: conceive of, write, and illustrate a comic book within the space of 24 hours. The total number of pages would equal the hour tally. Both artists rose to the challenge when they completed their comic books within the allotted time span on 2 separate days in late 1990. What began as a friendly rivalry between two fellow artists has turned into a challenge involving comic illustrators from across the globe. In keeping with the numerical theme, the 24-hour comic day occurs on the 24th day of April. Because this year's event fell on a Sunday, it actually started on April 23rd and finished early the next day. FYI, that was a little over 24 hours ago. 48 if you're reading today's lesson on the second of the 2 scheduled dates. This is only the second year that the event's been held, so there's good reason why you've never heard of it. Like the 2004 edition, artists were asked to submit their finished products to McCloud. Once the works have been scanned and processed, they will go online at www.scottmcloud.com/inventions/24hour/24hour.html, the artist's website. The 24-hour comics of 6 other well-known comic creators are presently on display at the web address. As the website indicates, the annual 24-hour comic challenge is governed by a set of rules. There's the 24-hour time limit naturally. Another rule allows participants to mentally come up with a concept, but no actual drawing on paper can occur before the designated date. No extra time is added if the artist needs to take a break for eating, sleeping, or using the facilities during the 24-hour time frame. But what if an artist is unable to complete his comic in the time allowed? McLeod gives 2 possible scenarios on what might occur. The first is known as the Gaiman variation, where the artist simply gives up and never completes the work, as Neil Gaiman did in 2004. The second goes by the name of the Eastman variation, after Kevin Eastman's completion of his comic several hours after the deadline had come and gone, also in 2004. Both works are considered noble failures, and McLeod still displays them in specially noted sections on his website. While it's fairly certain that the 24-hour comic has no bearing on the lives of any of today's readers, the fact remains that its ethos has rubbed off on other artists. Within the realm of comics, it has spawned another challenge that utilizes 24 as its overarching theme. The major difference is that in this version, participants have to complete 24 individual comic strips rather than pages. As for its impact on other genres, check out the 24-hour play competition. It requires participants to script and act out a play in 24 hours. There is also a filmmaking competition that follows similar guidelines, except that the hours allowed have been stretched to 48. And last but not least, there is also the comparatively longer National Novel Writing Month held each November in the U.S. It requires a 50,000-word work to be submitted by the end of the month, with no rewrites or editing allowed.
An unassuming actor. River Phoenix appeared in some of the most memorable movies of the 80s, plus a handful that came out in the early 90s. Fans remember how he died much too young after collapsing on the sidewalk outside the Viper Room, a Hollywood nightclub, on Halloween night in 1993. The phone call made to 911 was played over and over again on TV news in the days immediately following the tragedy. It was the first hint that River Phoenix's death had been drug-related, a fact later confirmed in the coroner's report. It was also the first time that most members of the general public had heard the sound of Joaquin Phoenix's voice. Accompanying River on that last drug-fueled evening of his life was Joaquin, the younger of the 2 Phoenixes and the one who placed the call. Only after Joaquin became a star in his own right, however, did the public learn that the voice pleading for help to come quickly was his. Joaquin never touches on the subject in interviews today, understandable given the way the events of the night played out. Having said that, the soft-spoken 30-year-old practically has to be coaxed into talking about anything in interviews. Joaquin's the retiring sort, an actor who's more at home in front of the movie camera than in the glare of media attention. That might explain why, even though he's an Oscar-nominated star, he can still walk down most streets unnoticed. The honor bestowed on him by peers, actors are nominated by fellow actors, came in 2000 for playing the role of villain. Joaquin played Commodus in Gladiator, the would-be emperor who stopped at nothing, not even patricide, to gain power. Audiences that caught the recent Ladder 49 might recall him acting alongside John Travolta in many heart-stopping scenes involving fire. Joaquin claims that if his performance in the film helps put the spotlight on the selflessness of firefighters, that's reward enough for him. A film that will probably put more focus on the publicity-shy actor than all his other films combined is Walk the Line, currently in production. Some tattle sheets cite the height disparity between the actor and the character he plays as reason for that. Joaquin, who stands 5'8", has been cast in the lead role of the late, great Johnny Cash, who stood 6'2". Fans loyal to the actor, however, say if anyone in Hollywood could fill the late singer's shoes via a movie performance, it's Joaquin. Even the original Man in Black, a nickname given to Johnny Cash long before Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones pluralized it, would likely approve. The black-clad singing legend once expressed admiration for Joaquin's acting. A recent interview with the Houston Chronicle had Joaquin reminiscing about the encounter. I couldn't believe it, but he actually quoted some of my dialogue, as spoken in Gladiator, to me, Joaquin recalled. The singer had the actor disbelieving his own ears by quoting verbatim one of the racier lines that he'd spoken in the film. Johnny Cash could go from kneeling and praying, he was an ordained minister, and then make that quote, said the actor. He really accepted and embraced all parts of himself. And no amount of fuss over height discrepancy will keep an actor like Joaquin from attempting to portray a character like that. Joaquin credits his parents for teaching me to trust my instincts and not to worry about what other people think. They must have heeded that philosophy when choosing River, Summer, Liberty, Rain, and Leaf before he changed it to Joaquin as their kids' names. All the Phoenix kids, like their parents before them, are vegans. That means Joaquin refuses to wear anything made of actual leather, even in character. Even if the leather comes emblazoned with the Prada logo, as one famous incident while filming demonstrated, Joaquin still won't wear it.
The end of the line for landlines. Starting at the end of March, Ford Motor Company began yanking landlines for the majority of its engineers. That's to say that the Detroit-based automaker has started issuing cell phones as permanent replacements for desktop phones. Mobile handsets are now in the hands of approximately 8,000 of its employees, with more to follow throughout the present year. It's one of those rare cases where a major corporation makes a sweeping policy change that pleases management and employees alike. The wholesale switch, the car manufacturer has determined, makes good business sense. Number crunchers say that jettisoning traditional phones and replacing them with cell phones does not mean an extra expenditure for the company. The cost of one desktop phone plus a standard issue pager ends up costing Ford about the same as a single cell phone. Moreover, cell phones will allow for a lot of collaboration and a lot of instant communication, according to Ford telecommunications manager Jeff Lemmer. Fixed lines in office cubicles just can't compare, he explained in a recent piece filed by Reuters news agency. Employees are often away from the desks, an issue that presents no obstacle to cellular technology. Even beepers didn't always alleviate that problem, since they still required the one being paged to find a landline for returning the call. Additionally, facilities at the Ford plant will be modified antennas, will be added where needed to guarantee there won't be any dead spots to get in the way of communicating. The complex where the changes are going into effect is in the Detroit suburb of Dearborn, the Ford Group's main HQ. The business world can't help but take note, since it represents the first time in the United States that a corporation of Ford's size has made an exclusive switch of this sort. A fairly large number of businesses have already gone cellular, but all of them were in the small to medium-size range. With 8,000 employees being affected in the first phase of Ford's switchover, other major firms can hardly afford to ignore the development. If efficiency receives the expected boost at the car manufacturer, they'll certainly follow suit. Sprint, the telecommunications giant that inked the deal with Ford, also stands to benefit. It believes that a huge number of companies will go the same route once the benefit of dumping fixed phones becomes apparent. Naturally, there's a bit of a culture shock in giving up a desktop phone, but once the swap's been made, Sprint says there's no going back. And most employees that get a free cell phone out of the deal have but one sentiment: what took so long? Indeed, the invasion of fixed office space by wireless technology is a clear trend of the future. These days, wireless routers linked all computers in a single office, doing away with the need for most cables and cords, within one's own partitioned space at least. It's only natural that fixed connections for office telephones would end up becoming obsolete. Companies who've dumped desktop phones tell those who haven't that making the switch is critical to maintaining a competitive edge. It guarantees that employees are reachable 24/7. Whether they're away from the cubicle or at home nursing a cold. Additionally, the businesses that have kept up with the times will adapt faster to the next generation of cell phones. Hybrids, as they're called, will use specialized systems that adapt to the particular environment that workers find themselves in. Depending on whether employees are at their desks or out and about, hybrid phones will maximize whatever technology exists in their immediate surroundings.
A watchdog barks. The international media watchdog agency, known as Reporters Without Borders, self-describes its mission to defend imprisoned journalists and press freedom throughout the world, as well as the right to inform the public and to be informed in accordance with Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Paris-based organization has offices in 9 countries and 130 correspondents scattered throughout the world. Reporters Without Borders recently released its high-profile annual worldwide index of press freedom, which is an attempt to rank all countries according to their levels of press freedom. In compiling the index, the watchdog teams up with 14 other press freedom organizations and asks journalists, researchers, and human rights activists to answer a 52-question survey. Beware, though. Like a true watchdog, the agency barks at most countries, and it positively growls at others. North Korea actually got its head bitten off. Among the 167 countries listed in the index, the reclusive communist dictatorship finished dead last for the 3rd consecutive year. Reporters Without Borders provided explanations for the rankings of each country and described journalism in North Korea as existing to serve the cult of personality of dictator Kim Jong-il, and added that dozens of journalists have been re-educated for minor supposed professional errors. Cuba was ranked 2nd worst. Before last spring, Fidel Castro's government didn't have any journalists imprisoned. However, Reporters Without Borders reported that Cuba is now second only to China as the biggest prison for journalists. With 26 in jail, China has 27, who have been giving sentences of between 14 and 27 years. As for China, the watchdog said it scores very low, 162nd place, since the ruling Communist Party has used violence to indicate the lines that must not be crossed. The country is the world's biggest prison for journalists. Despite promises made when Beijing was awarded the 2008 Olympic Games, the locally based foreign media is still closely monitored in its every move. Other countries that made up the bottom 10 included Burma, Turkmenistan, Eritrea, Vietnam, Nepal, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. Among English-speaking countries, New Zealand, 9th place, ranked the highest and actually managed to get a few words of praise from the watchdog. News diversity is respected in this Pacific democracy, and the government doesn't interfere at all, the agency said. Canada, 18th, came next, followed by the US, 22nd, the UK, 28th, and Australia, 41st. However, the watchdog had harsh words for the US, criticizing the country's security laws for causing problems in issuing press visas, and also mentioning an incident where several journalists were arrested during an anti-Bush demonstration. Iraq, which ranked right behind Singapore in 148th place, could have placed higher if it wasn't the deadliest country for journalists, with 44 killed since the war began. Afghanistan, which wasn't ranked under the Taliban government, was a surprise at 97th place and received this praise. The situation in Afghanistan improved markedly, with growing news diversity and the media daring to tackle sensitive topics. 8 Northern European countries tied for first place. Taiwan fared well in 60th place, 1 spot below Thailand and 1 above Panama. However, the watchdog barked a little, complaining that the government isn't always tolerant of opposition media. By comparison, Japan ranked 42nd, South Korea was 48th, and Hong Kong was 34th.